Hey y'all, Father Jim Haney from St. Paul's in the Plains in Lubbock and Texas Tech, Canterbury. Today is September 11th, the 17th anniversary of that terrible day in 2001 when America came under attack. Like those of you who are old enough, I have indelible memories of where I was and what I was doing on that day. I know we've got students at Tech now. The freshmen and sophomores are probably too young to remember what happened that day. They were toddlers at that point. Some seniors, some grad students, like my son Jimmy, my daughter Lisa, have some memories, but even then they were awfully, awfully young. But I don't want to share my memories of that particular day, but I wanted to share an experience I had later. 7 months after 9/11, I was privileged to be part of a group of Episcopal priests who were invited by Trinity Church to visit the ministries at St. Paul's Chapel. If you don't know about St. Paul's Chapel, it is right in the shadow of where the World Trade Centers were, and yet remarkably, when the towers fell, St. Paul's Chapel was not destroyed. It received some damage, but it was not destroyed. In fact, it became a base of operations for caring for recovery workers and cleanup workers at the disaster site in New York. It was an old church. George Washington had worshiped there at several points, and yet it was still around, and it provided a powerful ministry to first responders and construction workers and all those who were still 7 months afterwards working on the Ground Zero site. By that point, the Ground Zero site was almost excavated. It was almost the pit that you would see later, and that later became a memorial, a very powerful memorial in New York. At that time, I was shocked to see that the trees still had debris in them around St. Paul's Chapel. Pieces of paper, ash still in the trees, even 7 months later. A very sobering sight. But what was so impressive was to, number one, see the ministry inside that chapel and to see the people who were being ministered to. The ministry that St. Paul's did was just phenomenal. They organized a remarkable ministry of care for recovery workers. They got podiatrists in there, massage therapists, the finest restaurants in New York were sending food over there. It was just a remarkable thing. But even more moving to me was to see and to get to interact with some of those workers. I remember there was one NYPD police lieutenant in particular I was having a conversation with. And during the conversation, he was telling me about what his experiences were that day and his experiences in the months that followed. But then he kept thanking me. He kept saying thank you. And I had to remind him, I was a priest from Kansas. I was not part of the Diocese of New York. He said, I know that, but you're part of this church. So thank you for all you've been doing. And that was just incredibly humbling to think that he might thank me. I was the one that needed to thank him for all the hard work he had been doing those past 7 months. And yet, because the Episcopal Church had been ministering to him, he was thanking me as a representative of the larger church. It's a reminder that we don't always see the things we do as important, and yet other people might see them as essential. We might think that our efforts are inconsequential in our little corner of the kingdom of God, and yet they have wide-ranging importance, far beyond what we might see. The same thing went on September 11th. The stories of heroism were not from superheroes. They were from ordinary men and women who responded in extraordinary ways. Firefighters who ran into the building while others were running out. Just an amazing acts of heroism in doing ordinary things. And so I'd remind you that what you do for God's kingdom, to love God's people and God's world, those things may seem ordinary to you, but to those who are on the receiving end of your ministries, they can be extraordinary. Even a smile, a kind word to someone who's having a horrible day can have wonderful implications that go far beyond what you might expect at the time. So be vehicles of God's love, God's care in this world. Hopefully you won't ever have to respond to something as traumatic as the disaster, the attacks on 9/11, but in your ordinary life, try to be a vehicle of God's grace, God's love to those you meet. God bless. Have a wonderful day.